thinking about what you're doing is going to make the execution much easier because you've thought about it. But what happens today is the other way around. So execution, it happens first, and then the thinking happens during the execution. Does that make any sense? No. That's a behavior in companies that needs to change, right? So then what happens is now you have to teach people how to think. Now, thinking does not involve just you. You have to understand the problem space, right? So you may have to involve other people. So how do you get them to involve the right people so that they're not wasting other people's time, right? All of these things are actually what you have to work on in a company.
Hi, I'm Mike Pincus, co-founder of Connect CPA and your host at GrowthTales. Today's guest is Shrad Rao, the CEO of Wagepoint. For those who haven't heard of Wagepoint, they're one of the fastest growing payroll software companies in the country, with over 25,000 customers and hundreds of employees. Shrad entered what seemed like a saturated payroll market, but always leaned into Wagepoint's philosophy of the product being simple and the company being backed by the world's friendliest team. During the conversation with Shrad, we discussed the importance of friendship and community while building a business. We also chatted about bonus structures and how to align a team with hundreds of employees. Finally, we discussed how team members need to grow and challenge themselves by solving difficult problems. As a longtime customer of Wagepoint with Connect CPA, I can personally vouch for the friendliness and attention to customer experience. Shrad is both a friend and a partner of ours, and I hope you really enjoy this episode. Hey, Shrad, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Mike, it's good to meet you. I don't know why I did that in a DJ voice, but yeah, it's good to be here.
That was amazing. Shrad, before we kick this off, we've known each other a long time, and I feel like we run into each other at conferences. And what started off as us as Connect CPA being your customer, and obviously we're huge fans of Wagepoint and all that you do, I think it's blossomed into a friendship over these years of, I know it's only once in a while we see each other in person at all these events, but I feel like it's changed into a friendship, what started as a business relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the love is real, right? Like that's the thing. Like when you wish the best for someone else and they wish the same for you, like, I mean, it's kind of the best friendship, right? So, and the kind of friendships I like is where there's not a lot of obligation. Like we don't have to stay in touch, but when we do see each other, it's like no time has passed. So I think that's a fair characterization of our friendship.
And I would agree with that completely. And before we kick it off and start going through a bunch of questions, I want to just start off, Shrad, by asking you, can you tell everyone what Wagepoint is and what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wagepoint is a payroll software built just for small businesses in Canada and backed by the world's friendliest team. So when we talk about friendship, we mean it. We bring it into everything, even our interactions with our customers. And you know, our mission has always been to just make this problem go away for small businesses, because payroll is a domain. It's not just it's not a specific action. It's not a specific feature. It's an entire body of knowledge. And of course, most small businesses don't have any idea of what's involved in that. So our job is to make it so that that's okay, that they know they need to do some things. And of course, they have to learn along on the way, on the journey. But our job is to really just simplify how they experience paying their employees and paying all the taxes and stuff associated.
And Shrad, I asked that question despite the fact that I believe you have over 25,000 customers now. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, we have a couple of other products now. We bought a couple of companies, which is something I say now as a CEO. So yeah, we have 22,000 payroll customers, and then we have 3,000 customers within our time and attendance and our light HR product. So yeah, that's the total. So 25,000 in total that we serve at the moment.
Which is an incredible number. And I've always looked up to you as an entrepreneur, and the software game is not easy. And so I guess, Shrad, I want to open with a question for you, which is, you entered a crowded space. Like I remember the early days at the conferences and stuff, like ADP was there, Ceridian was there,
Yeah.
Payment Evolution, the list goes on and on. You've a lot of competitors in what still is a pretty crowded payroll software space. How did you grow to 25,000 customers? What is the secret sauce that has made you over these years just accumulate so many fans joining WagePoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is usually simple, right? For most of these things, we tend to overcomplicate it, but it's one answer. It's great positioning. We did a very good job speaking to our audience and our audience. So you think about most of our competitors, they serve small, medium, and large businesses. If you are ADP and you're a customer of yours is TD Bank, you're not going to treat a barber the same way that you're going to treat TD Bank when they come up for renewals and stuff like that, right? And
Yeah.
you're going to have the same mentality in the way that you serve a large company. Just as an example, the existence of contract. Why do you need a contract with a small business? Shouldn't they be able to choose when they come and leave the relationship? That would be an example of like all the decisions that you make. You don't think about the small business when you are trying to do everything for everyone. So we picked a lane. We said we're going to stick with the small business owner. The reason is because I like them. They are actually fun to talk to. They're good people generally. They tend to do good honest work, right? They show up for their families. Like these are real people that you get to help. Why wouldn't we serve them? It's not that large companies suck. It's just that a lot of people, they are jobs for them, and okay, yeah, some of them like their soul dies. When you work for like a large company, you just don't have the same impact, so you start to feel unhappy, all that other stuff. Just dealing with that is just not interesting. So we wanted to serve the small business market, and when I looked at the market, I kind of describe it sometimes like the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, like where you have a pirate ship that you have jagged rocks sticking out from
Yeah.
every direction. And then you have to take your ship and kind of navigate that course without essentially dying in the process, right? And so our path was, can we obsess over the small business experience? What would that look like? How do we think about pricing in relation to that? So for example, all of our competitors had like nickel and diming pricing. We were like, fuck that. Is it that okay on this podcast? I
It
assume
is complete. It's encouraged.
it's encouraged. Excellent. Yeah. So that would be an example of like where we have an all-in-one pricing versus a nickel and dime pricing. It sounds small, but actually to figure out all the costs of the business that would then go into the right price point, that's actually hard to do. So
Mhm.
all of these decisions together always serve the small business. And when we did that, what ends up happening is when a small business comes to our website, for example, and everything is tailored to that audience, and every decision we make is tailored to that audience, they know that you are thinking about them. They know you are taking care of them in the process, and then they start taking care of you. That's how this works. This business thing is actually a symbiotic relationship, right? It's like the egret and the buffalo or whatever in the
Mhm.
African plains, right? That's what it is. It's like we're taking care of each other. And what tends to happen in business is it becomes like a military operation, which is fucking weird. What it
Mhm.
really is a community, right? We are building things for you. You are taking care of us by, helping us bring customers. You're giving us advice. You care about us. One of the things that I love about our company is the amount of love notes that we get from customers and even partners, right? Like people write things like, we love you, we want to marry you, like, can I name my first child after you? And I was like, please don't. That would be a terrible name, right? And of course it's all in jest, but it's because we are so approachable in the way that we interact with the customer. We like to think of ourselves as their friend. Like imagine if they were calling a friend and they were having a problem, and how does a friend react or respond when you call? That's how we got to take care of them. And so it's just continues. So the answer is never about the business strategies. It's about the feelings that you evoke in somebody. We need to create a sense of safety around this problem. Great friendships do that. That's essentially how we did it. And this is why it's I could tell you, there's obviously there's business strategies that are underneath what I just said,
Hmm.
You need to follow it up. You need to put your money where your mouth is, right? So you got to do all of those things. But the overall experience of interacting with us, that's what we needed to get right first. And then every decision follows that principle. Does
And
that see what I'm saying?
that's an amazing description of how to do it. And Shrad, I guess with looking at a team now that you're bigger, like when you're explaining this to me, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense in terms of you put it right on your website. Simple and helpful. And
Yeah,
those two words they mean a lot because payroll is normally
yeah,
complicated
yeah,
and support or getting help with payroll is normally the opposite of helpful, like typically.
yeah.
But now, how did you invoke that when you become a bigger organization into your culture? Because I know Shrad is helpful. There's no doubt. But now you've got a team. Every personality is different as you go through hiring people. How do you hold that standard that your customers feel the way they feel when they speak to you when your team, who's an extension of that vision, is now branched out with a lot of people? So like, how do you maintain that culture?
Yeah, that's also a great question. The thing is that most people are wired to behave this way. Okay, it's companies that basically stamp it out. Okay, what happens in companies typically is that most people are, so they'll say be yourself, and then as soon as they do that, their hand is slapped and say no, 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 I didn't mean that. Okay, so the first thing is to agree on accepting each other. All of us have to agree that by accepting each other, we're going to accept the good, bad, and problematic sides that all of us have. All of us come with that. There's no point in pretending that we're perfect. Okay, that's the actual issue. It's the minute that we start focusing on the idea of being perfect, we kind of ruin the illusion. Essentially, is lost. You know, like the plot is lost. That's so. One of the things that I do with every single person that joins the company, and before they're about to sign the contract, I have something called a culture call with them, where all I do is explain how we think about culture in this company.
And
And
you
I
do
ask,
that, Shrad? Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. You do that?
yes, I do it
Wow.
every single. And so over the last 12 years, I this is like a doctorate for me. This is, I have actually I could write a PhD thesis on this. This is how crazy it is. So maybe I've done about 350 of these, and I have actual insights from this. One of these days, on some stage somewhere, I'm going to share some of these insights because it's actually mind blowing stuff. But the purpose of the culture call is to get people to opt in, choose to behave in this manner, not to do it for me, not to do it because they need the job, but for them to actually choose to act, to remember that we're embracing friendship with the customer, with each other. I don't use those words, but I guide them to this understanding. And the reason I do this call is very simple. One of the things I've realized in my life is I cannot make anyone do anything. I cannot genuinely, literally make anyone do anything. I
Hmm.
can ask them to do it, but then it's their choice as to whether they do it or not. So by putting the power in their hands, then that puts responsibility in their hands for the culture. So the entire company maintains the culture. This is a completely decentralized culture. I am not the bastion of the culture, if you will. I'm not the epicenter of it. I'm just another participant in it. And I deliberately do not create guardrails or like safety nets so that
Hmm.
whatever it becomes is a result of all of us. And it's a very it's again, these are most of the practices that I follow are very human centric. Like I'm actually thinking about how people behave. I'm not thinking what is the best management practice here. I'm thinking how do people typically operate in this condition, in this situation, and then I'm doing that. And that's the big difference between when you, like, most people are like, let me see what Elon Musk is doing and let me try to dissect his principles. That probably works for him, but for me, you got to look inside for the problem, not external to you.
That's a it's an amazing way to look at it. And I think most companies would love to emulate that in terms of making sure that their team feels like it's a friendly environment and an inclusive culture, that the culture also allows individuality, as you mentioned. But then I think one of the questions that a lot of startups and or even scaled out entrepreneurs are thinking as they're hearing you say that, Shrad, is as companies scale, as WagePoint has,
Yeah.
how do big companies end up the way they are? I always ask
Yeah.
that question. And so I'm going to bring up a word, standards, which is obviously in business, speed matters. And
Yeah.
there's something called Parkinson's law that says people will fill the time that you allot to them to get something done.
Yeah.
How do you balance that culture of giving that individuality and that freedom and the ability to be yourself within a company, but also invoking the standard that you probably want your team to be obsessed with your customers and helpful and going above and beyond and living by like additional attributes that might not be the most comfortable? How do you balance those two things?
It's very difficult. It's actually, that's the problem to solve. In scale, that's the problem to solve. Like, people think scaling is about the revenue side, but actually what it is that it's about getting people to, well, cooperate, collaborate, and coordinate in a way that will get you the revenue. Those three C's are a pain in the ass to get right. They're hard
Right.
to do, right? So my answer to that question is, you don't tell them what to do, you try to teach them how to think. So if you teach them how to think and you're focused on mindset work regularly, you will find yourself, I believe, like an Amazon or a Shopify. Or like, if you kind of see how those companies grow, let's use Shopify as an example, right? Shopify is the most valuable company in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
the most valuable company in Canada, right? How did they do that? How is that possible? The answer, it tends to be mindset work. So an example of that is, one of the things that has happened in our company, and this is very common, is that people are working on things that don't actually matter. So it looks like
Right.
work, but it doesn't actually do anything for the company. And so then they get upset because they're like, I'm doing the work. Why are you unhappy with me? And then in return, we're saying, well, what's the impact of the work that you're doing? So now, how do we teach them that? How do we actually take someone through those steps? So one of the answers is, for example, we are, one of the sort of the themes that I said, this is what we're going to focus on fixing this year, is how do we identify and work on the right problems? Okay, so problem reframing is a very, very big part of what we're focused on right now. And underneath that, there's many root behaviors that allow you to reframe problems better. So I'll give you a very simple example of something that we did at our town hall recently. So one of our very talented senior folks who actually came from Shopify, he ran an exercise for the company, and the exercise was essentially, imagine if we there was an older building that had two elevators, and then people in the building were complaining because the elevators are frustrated. They're frustrated because the elevators are slow.
Mm-hmm.
Then we went through a 5 whys exercise of, why is that happening? And in the 5 whys exercise, most people focused on the fact that the elevators were slow. So what ended up happening is, you have the answer to it eventually is, you have to demolish the building and build a better building with more elevators. Okay, that's typically what happens when you start to focus on the fact the elevators are slow. But when you focus on the fact that people are frustrated instead, so you reframe the problem, you could get away with putting mirrors in the lobby, that then, because people are obviously, all of us are obsessed with the way we look and constantly checking ourselves out, you can actually change the perception of time in their mind so that the slow elevator is now not a problem. That's an example of problem reframing. And this is how powerful it is. When you get this right and you focus on the right part of the problem, you can actually have exponential, incremental effort, exponential gains. So the objective is to do less, but to have the same outcome. Now, if you're teaching this continuously in different ways, in visual ways, in verbal ways, inside of a specific activity, like a specific work task, over time, the entire body that is your community, essentially the organism that is the business, starts to ingest that, and then the mindset changes, and then there's an elevation, there's an uplift. This is actually how you build sustainable, durable businesses, is that you actually work on the thinking, not on the doing. So yeah, I see you're very quiet, Mike. Do you have
I'm
anything?
listening because I'll tell you what's going through my head. I'm gonna spit it out. I'm gonna say, how do you find out? So your analogy to the mirrors, how do you find out what that is? Because you've got all these smart people in a room, but who is the brilliant person's like, it's the mirrors that will solve the slow elevator problem. But let's reframe that for Wagepoint or any business that's growing. How do you discover the quote unquote mirrors? How do you know
Yeah.
what that is?
And like I said, that is the problem to solve. That is the actual problem to solve. It's not, it's so interesting that, like, what tends to happen in businesses is that we tend to think that it's external factors. Generally, that's the problem,
Mm-hmm.
but most of it are internal factors. So the way that you work on this problem is that you, first of all, you bring everyone's attention to the fact that they have to be looking for the things that you like just as an example, when I tell people in the company, I want you to do less work, that sounds crazy, right? That's like,
Yes.
what I'm really saying is, I don't actually want you to work. I want you to solve problems. That's different, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
I'm really looking for is some, like, if you could do the same thing, you could solve the problem, but do a lot less to solve the problem. That's what I'm looking for. So
Mm-hmm.
now what you do is so our bonuses, for example, this, I just had a very, I presented to the company super transparently how we are doing bonuses, like
Mm-hmm.
how I'm going to, how I can, what is the approach to bonuses essentially.
Right.
So I picked a time when I know that everyone was going to be paying a lot of attention, right, because it's about them. And then I told them what I wanted, and what I did is I created a small chart that basically says, and I mean, of course, I'm happy to share this chart, like it's a tiny little thing, but it's basically 4 colors. Okay. And it starts with, if you've met expectations at your job, you're going to get the lowest bonus because
Mm-hmm.
the impact is as expected.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next layer up is that you've put effort to find the right problem, but maybe you haven't found it as yet, but just the effort is something we're going to reward because you're going in the right direction. So that's a different color.
Mm-hmm.
Then the one above that is, you've found the right problem and you're working actively to solve it with the group of people. Now you're moving even further in the right direction, and that's a different color. And that's, so now that gets even higher bonus. And the final one is a disco ball. And that is when that is when
That
you
means good
both,
things.
that means amazing. Yes, that is basically when you have both, you've actually solved the problem at hand and the impact has been felt. Everything has been fit. And now you get the highest bonus. And that's called the disco ball club. That's when you're in the disco ball club. So now I presented this to the company. Now, of course, anything that I do is going to be fun. Okay. There's at least going to be an element of it. I can't help it. There's no point in life otherwise.
Right.
So what happens is, when you do that inside of that structure, and then you make sure people understand what you're rewarding, what ends up happening is, now I actually have people writing to me saying, is this the right problem that I'm solving? Am I thinking about this the right way? Or they're talking to each other like that. So now you're creating a common way of starting to understand how to think about it. It is stupidly hard. This
Of
stuff
course it is.
is so
Yeah.
hard, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
Whatever people think company building is, it multiply that by 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's, or 100 on some days. That's how difficult it is, because the problem is not the company. The problem is changing human behavior. The problem is helping people think and then do. But what we do today, what happens today is people do and then think along the way. The thinking is a lost art. So just as an example, to do that job, to do this presentation, I thought about the problem for 2 months and I wrote the presentation in an hour before I had to deliver it, because I spent so much time thinking about it. And I talked to some folks about what I was thinking about doing. Like I did work the entire time to move myself in the direction. I wanted to it's such an impactful thing. It's so important that I wanted to make sure that even the last minute I had thinking time. And I'll just give you one analogy that's very, very similar to what I'm saying. Actually, it's not an analogy, it's a story. So I watched Charlie Rose talk to Warren Buffett and Bill Gates on Charlie Rose's show
Yep.
a few years ago. And this was very impactful for me. So I've always been the kind of CEO where I try to have as much unstructured time as I have structured time. So I really try to give myself unstructured time. And a lot of times my calendar is the least busy in the company.
I was going
Now,
to ask you
that's not
that.
always true. Sorry?
I was going to ask you that. That was one of my questions, is how you're spending your time. So you do
Yeah.
have blank time in your calendar.
I've it's important. Like I need it, right? So that's the thing. So I watched these two folks talk, and I used to always wonder, like, am I the one who's making a mistake here? Should my calendar like be like a full, like super busy? Because I've always known why I've kept it free. I so when I watched the show, I heard so Bill Gates was talking about Warren Buffett, okay? And Bill Gates said, I used to think that every minute of my day had to be blocked with somebody. I had to be unblocking something, like doing something every minute of my day. So my calendar used to be jam packed, right? He would have whatever, like two assistants managing it. Like that's how crazy it was. And then when he was sitting with Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett said, "What are you so busy doing?" And Bill Gates was like, "Don't you have a similar schedule?" He's like, "No." And he pulled out his book and he showed him his calendar, and there were like 2 meetings in the day and stuff like that. So Bill Gates was like, "How are you doing this?" And Warren Buffett was like, "If you are in meetings all the time, when do you have time to think?"
Yeah. It's Warren Buffett is I think I've seen this actual podcast you're talking about, and how he, like, first of all, I don't even think he has a computer. So ignore the Coca-Cola every day and the McDonald's for breakfast and an
Yeah,
empty calendar. Like,
yeah.
wow, he's a unicorn in itself. But
Yes, but the point is about thinking, right? That's the thing. Like thinking about what you're doing is going to make the execution much easier because you've thought about it. But what happens today is the other way around. So execution, it happens first, and then the thinking happens during the execution. Does that make any sense? No. That's a behavior in companies that needs to change, right? So then what happens is now you have to teach people how to think. Now, thinking does not involve just you. You have to understand the problem space, right? So you may have to involve other people. So how do you get them to involve the right people so that they're not wasting other people's time, right? All of these things are actually what you have to work on in a company. And so what ends up happening is most companies kind of fall back to like OKRs and like performance goals and all this other stuff. And you do need some of that. But what happens is then you become overstructured.
right,
And as soon as you become overstructured, become bureaucracies. And then you basically become like mini governments, which is where shit gets very hard to do. And it's because most of how we do this is we don't honor the human experience. We're doing something else. We're trying to pretend to be sort of a machine system. But what we are is messy and difficult and problematic. And if we build to those problems, we will actually get further along. So do I believe that our company will become like a what do we call it? Automaton? I'm
yeah,
not
I
saying
know, yeah,
automation. I don't know. Whatever. Do I believe that it's going to eventually come to a place where we're all like acting like robots? Maybe. I don't know. But what I do know is that as long as I'm around, I'm going to try to resist it because I'm going to try to remember that this is a human experience at the end of the day. It is not a standard operating process or procedure. And as soon as you give in to that belief that, we should try to like create as much uh, machine behavior, well, what's the point then? So that's essentially like all the things I'm telling you is all of the things that I see are actual problems in the way that we run businesses. And if we address these at the root level, which is inside of the human experience, within thought first and action second, and how to think. So listen, Mike, here's the reality, right? All of us are dealing with all of us, including myself, we're all children of the society that we're brought up in,
right.
right? We are children of a society where trophy participation for is getting
For showing
trophy.
up, yeah,
Yeah, for showing up was a
just for
thing.
showing up.
people who were not whose parents didn't engage them in critical thinking or proper socialization, and something's bad have happened to people, and all of that stuff, that entire society is in your company.
Mm-hmm.
If
Because it
those are
carries
not,
with them.
that's the thing. If those are ignored, if that is ignored, that's when you have trouble. And so my point is, let's not ignore it. Let's build a company where people actually grow and challenge themselves. And I don't mean that in like a career development standpoint. I mean that as people, right? This is just, a company is just a safe space for where you can actually work on your own shit.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we build a company that does that for people? So that's essentially kind of how I think about it.
That's an amazing way to think about it. And before, well, I've got two more things I want to ask you quickly, Shrad. I know we're running out of time, but I guess the first one I want to ask you is the leadership side. A lot of these principles you're bringing up, I think, go back to leadership. And you've obviously changed as a CEO from your early days to now in terms of your thinking, because your team's bigger. And what I'd love to understand is you explain that bonus framework that you have right now. And at the size of company you are, there's obviously a mix of
Yeah.
objectivity and subjectivity, and figuring out, does someone really deserve a disco ball? That seems like a really, really high standard. Does someone deserve this color versus that color? How have you, as a leader, tried to I guess, train? I don't know if train is the right word, but to give this critical thinking to your leadership team, because you can't be everywhere. And these are things that you probably want to be quite precise, meaning these are
Yeah.
people's lives, their incomes. Bonus is a sensitive type of thing. How do you go about managing that, at least as you as a leader and with your leadership team?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So what I do is I ask them to provide the ratings first. So actually, my first thing was to do an A, B, C, and then A plus plus rating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then I got feedback that that would feel like a report card, and people would remember their high school days at that time.
Yes.
So then it would cut differently, So then I switched it to colors, because colors are a lot more neutral. Like they have less, the people have less relationships with them, or at least negative relationships. So I get the managers to first rate the folks, and then I challenge the ratings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes I upgrade people after I've talked to some people. Sometimes I downgrade people. So I just challenge the rating, and I
Mm-hmm.
give them an opportunity to explain to me why that is, why they think something. So somebody, for example, is rated an A, and then I found out why, and I found out that they were like working on a project essentially that was going to take care of the whole company in in let's
Mm-hmm.
call it very productive ways, but they worked on it on their own. And I'm like, that's a waste of time, because if you
Mm-hmm.
don't involve the people who are going to be impacted in a positive way by the thing you're
Right.
doing, that's like a zero. Essentially,
Right.
now it's a negative, because you're taking time and money and energy from the company, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like, you have to keep challenging the way people think, and you can't be afraid of that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the big leadership lessons for me growing up, is that I've learned that, you know, I was just telling you earlier that I was watching Gordon Ramsay on Kitchen Nightmares. And
Love
typically I don't like,
Ramsey.
yeah, typically
When
I
you
don't like,
asked if you can swear, love Ramsey.
yeah, well, I mean, he's made a trademark from the whole thing. But typically I don't like watching it, because I don't eat animals, and I don't like to see all of the preparation around it. But I started to just try to watch it, just to watch how he leads people through the problem. And I started to get a lot of lessons from that. For example, he's not actually egoistical about it. He's there to open their eyes, and he has only like a week or whatever that he spends time with those folks. He can't build relationships and then ease them into it. He has to just tell them to their face, and they're
Right.
usually calling him when the situation is dire, right? So the point I'm making is that there is a place for that kind of truth. You can call it radical candor, you can call it whatever, but there is a place for that kind of truth in leadership, where it is so indisputable that there's nothing left to say. There's only action that can be taken. And that is I've always been very straightforward, but I've tried to be like gentle in my approach. recently I have decided that if I cannot get someone's attention, I have to switch to more of a Gordon Ramsay style, if you will. And
Hmm.
it's not very comfortable for me because it's not my natural nature and I don't like the feeling. But I also think that my part of my job is to get over it sometimes for myself and just say leadership, it it's not about one style at all times. It's about changing your style as the situation requires it. And that's a very significant, like I'm usually the kind of leader that, I'm like typically a buddy, I'm
Yeah.
like, you know just using my dog training as an analogy. I have a German Shepherd, and the trainer told me if you ask him to sit 5 times, he has to sit 5 times. He can't sit 3 out of those 5 times.
Right.
And I was always like, he sit 3 out of 5 times. He's doing well. Such a big boy, right? That's the kind of leader I've typically been. But then I've realized that if I am here to bring out the most potential, the best potential in people, that is my only job. I have no other job. That is the job. Bring the best out of everyone. Then I have to get them to do whatever I'm asking in the way that I'm asking it. And it's rather not what to do, but understand what I mean. They
Hmm.
have to walk away from a conversation, from an interaction, understanding what I mean so that they can go and actually do that in the framing that I just explained. So the point I'm trying to make is that in order to take care of a German Shepherd, I have to become my best self. I have to rise to my full potential. And that was what I have been learning recently in my leadership thing. And
I,
it's a pain in the ass also because it
it's
requires
hard.
me to do, yes, I gotta be better than I was, right? So, but it's all just acknowledgement that I have to lead by example by getting better as a leader and recognizing that not all conversations can be, sunshine and puppies. Some of them have to create some amount of, let's call it angst, but it cannot be sustained, right? Like I need to create urgency and action and all of that stuff. But my point is that that's how I've been thinking about leadership a little bit more recently. So yeah, it's been
It's
quite an interesting ride.
it's an amazing way to explain it. And Shrad, it's funny. I've had a mentor that has explained to me like a sports team versus a family. And sports teams, people have different compensation structures, right? And it's not that makes you a bad person or me a bad person, that you have to have maybe more increasingly higher standards by level within an organization, no different than a sports team would. And
Yeah.
I just comes to mind, I'm in Toronto right now. We're watching the Leafs. Come on, Leafs, please,
Yes.
one time. Uh, but like the expectations on our superstar Austin Matthews are different than other players. And so,
Absolutely.
um, but hearing you
It
say that as in a big company that you're managing, um, how to communicate while deep down you want to be that family like person to everyone, but unfortunately you aren't in the game of working with family where you will let things go with a brother, sister, parent. You unfortunately have to have high standards in order for your customers to win, right? And
kind of I take a slightly different angle to that. I don't view them as family at all.
mhm,
I view all of us as friends. We're all friends. So we should be able to do anything together if we chose to work together on something. If we wanted to start a band together, that should be possible. Or stand up a barn in mid-century England, that should be possible, right? Like any of this stuff, like we have to figure out how to make that happen. The point is, when you think about great friendships, like the best friendships that you have, they are usually the people who don't hold back, right? They tell you the truth. And
authentic.
that is what I'm after at the end of the day. I want us to do this like friends, but like good friends, the
Mhm,
kinds that actually know when to show up and when to come to your house and help you, and also when to leave, right?
mhm,
Like all of those things are part of great friendships. You don't Your friend, if you really are like very good friend with someone, you don't want them to pick up the bill all the time, right?
mhm,
You want to make sure that it's equitable. Those friendships can be made with your employees or with your customers. All of this whole thing is an illusion at the end of the day. We are actually just all friends. We are all trying to cooperate with each other. You guys, for example, at Connect CPA, you've been amazing leaders in the space that you're in. You were the first one of the first cloud accounting firms that we ever worked with. Okay, so you guys actually built that category in Canada alongside Live CA and Zen Accounting. You
Hmm.
were the three first folks that we worked with and in this process, and all three of you were way forward looking than most of the folks that we had talked to at that time. You literally built the category, Mike.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it
It's a
feels like
fact.
so long ago, but
Yes, it's a fact. It's a reality, right? So that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, that's why we became friends, because you guys were forward thinking. We are forward thinking. We are like, how do we break this stalemate in the way that business is run recently? Like, why does it have to be our parents' companies? What would our companies in our generation look like? And they are companies where things like friendship, like, in our parents' companies, they would say, don't become friends with your employees, right?
right.
But we don't even listen to that. Why? Because what else would we do? Why would we deny ourselves that?
And you spend
That
so much time together.
you spend so much time with them. That's the thing. And you like them. Why would you try to keep distance? Wouldn't you try to bring each other closer? Right? But that means that in that closeness, the truth has to show up too. If
Hmm.
something isn't working, you have to be able to talk about it. And then finally, the reason I don't call it a family is because you have to choose each other. In this relationship, both sides can walk away. That is not a family.
Yeah.
So, and I don't call it a sports team either, because in a sports team, you have, I mean, look, sports teams these days are all like, they're not playing for the love of sport all the time, right?
Hmm.
It's now become, how big is the Raptors franchise and the Leafs franchise? Like, I mean,
Right.
it's just kind of ruined the point of
Maybe the
sports.
teams that win, though. Maybe the teams that win. I
I
don't know
know.
what that says about my hometown because we haven't
I
won
know.
in like in a century. But yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, and I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm just saying it's just not the point, right?
Right.
To keep the point on the problem, I'm saying that this is how we need to remember that we have a friendship because the business is extra, you know. The
Hmm.
fact is that we see the world similarly. Not that that's important. It just means that we get to build businesses together and help each other in the process. That's what friends do. So that's kind of how I view the situation.
That's amazing. Shrad, last question for you. And I know we've run out of time. I appreciate you spending so much time. Last question is, what advice would you give to either entrepreneurs that maybe have scaled to the level of Wagepoint, also ones that haven't quite gone to that level yet of, if you were to give one piece of advice, I know you probably have like 100 things that you could give, and we could talk until end of the year on all the things you've probably learned over these years. But if you were to give one or two, what are some of the advice you'd give to entrepreneurs?
Um, wow, yeah, I think that if you haven't scaled your businesses yet, don't fall into the trap of overbuilding your product. That's a very common problem. I hear it all the time. Anytime somebody has missed on the go to market with their product,
Mm-hmm.
the next thing you have to do is find out where you missed, not build more product. And most people, that's what they do. They just kind of like go like, well, what is the thing in my control? Well, the product's in my control. Let me just continue to build that up, right? So they look more, I guess they don't think about the problem they're actually solving. And this is what I was saying to you. This is very common. And then in all cases, spend more time thinking about what you're doing. Spend more time making sure that you are actually involving people who can help you think. This whole game is a thinking game. It's a strategy game. It is not, and the actions flow from the strategy. It's literally like playing, like I think in chess, after like three moves or something, there's like a million opportunities or a million possibilities. And
Oh
then
yeah.
Go, or in Go, it's like after one move, there's like something like 10 million or something crazy. That's the thing. If you're an entrepreneur, this is a strategy game. If you spend more time on your strategy, and strategy simply means what is the approach? Like I talked about the Pirates of the Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's all it is. It's just a strategy. You're winding your way through this world to the set of things that you have to essentially navigate. And you have to find the best navigation through that. So that's actually very often people get confused about what this game is, and it is a strategy game. It is like playing Catan or Risk or whatever. It's not like playing Uno.
Maybe
Uh,
that's what we should be doing for our next company retreat, is playing some strategy games, like board
well,
games.
I'll give you one last thing here just before we wrap up. Our our chief experience officer, when she was having, she wanted to, we were changing the structure of our CS team, and
Hmm.
we were getting people who've done that job for a long time to move to a different position, and other people to come in and take over from them, but we still wanted them all to work together. So this is a very complicated human behavior and human experience situation, right? There's a lot of, like, you know, there's some territoriality that is natural as part of that.
For
Instead
sure.
of getting upset with that, we lean into that and work through that problem. So what she did was she took the game of Risk and adapted that game with Wagepoint content, and then she made them play it.
That's amazing.
So when you ask me how we do it, it's through puzzles, to teaching. The company is a school. The more you can see it like that, the better your outcomes are going to be. That's what we are betting on, at least.
Well, Shrad, uh, like I said to start this podcast, have huge respect for you as an entrepreneur and a CEO. And at Connect CPA, we've been customers for many years, but we're also fans of WagePoint. You've made payroll simple, which is a loaded statement, but you've made payroll simple. And like I said, I think we've built a friendship, and I know your time is really valuable. So part of that friendship is I do appreciate you spending. I know we've gone a little bit over here today, but I really appreciate you spending the time with me.
Absolutely, same way. We are also fans. We love you guys. We want you to be super successful, and it's true for pretty much all of the people that work with us. Like, if we our intention is always to help and to be there for each other. That's why I go back to the idea of friendship. So thank you for having me, and I can't wait to see where you guys head next. And we're super fans ourselves.
Well, we'll always be in touch along the way, right?
Yes. All right, my man. Take care.
Thanks, Shrad.